Today I'll be reading Chapter 14 of Prisoner B-3087. So, Tasmania Concentration Camp, 1944. And Chapter 14 starts on page 106. Chapter 14. Our job was to move a pile of rocks. They were big rocks, and it was a big pile. The rocks were heavy and rough, and we were given no wheelbarrows or gloves. The rocks had to be moved from one side of the assembly field to another, and the Nazis yelled at us and beat us if we were too slow, or if they thought we were carrying a rock that was too small for us. I put my arms around another stone and lifted, my back crying out in pain. The rock tore and scraped at my skin as I cradled it to my chest and staggered across the yard to dump it in the new pile. Then I did it again and again. One of the other men stumbled and collapsed, and the guards fell on him with sticks and clubs. I hefted another rock and kept working while I tried not to let the Nazis see how afraid I was. They were like aim-and-go-out dogs. They could smell fear on you. They liked nothing better than to attack when you were at your weakest. By midday, my arms and hands and chest were so raw and bruised, I couldn't have gone on. But by then we were finished. I would have dropped to the ground, but I knew I would just be beaten for it. So I stood with others, wobbling on my shaking legs, while I waited for the guards to tell us what new task awaited us. Good, the SS officer in charge of us said. Now move it back. I blinked stupidly, not understanding at first. We had just worked all morning to move this pile of stones across the camp, and now the Nazis were changing their minds. The other prisoners and I looked at one another to see if we had heard right. I said, "Move this pile back where it was," the SS officer yelled. He moved through our group, hitting us with a stick until we moved. "You will move it where it was, and you will move it, and then you will move it again. Now work." Such was life at the Tasmania concentration camp. I had been transferred there after a short time mining salt at Wyszynska. Wyszynska had been hard, but the Tasmania was worse. Because of Tasmania, the Nazis played games. The Nazis were making us work just to work. This is all a game to them, like a hand of cards or a soccer match. We were the ball, to be kicked around for their sport. My arms shook as I picked up the same stone that I had just carried across the compound, but not from weariness this time, from fury. I fumed as I hefted the stone and trudged back across the muddy compound. But they wanted me to be angry. They wanted me to say something, or frown, or mumble curses at them. They were watching me for it, watching all of us, like schoolyard bullies. They wanted to provoke us, and then they would beat us as punishment. At Tasmania, I worked all day, moving piles of rocks back and forth, digging holes 6 feet deep, and then filling them back in again. I ate watery broth and weak old bread once a night, and passed out on a wooden pallet with no mattress or pillows or blankets. I was an animal to them, a pack mule, but beasts were never treated so poorly. Working animals were expensive. They had value. I was a Jew. We were lower than animals. They could kill as many of us as they wanted, and there would always be another trainload of us to take our place. But as angry as I was at the Nazis, I was even angrier at my fellow prisoners. How could we take this abuse so quietly, so meekly, with our heads bowed and a quick tip of the cap to our killers? Yes, the Nazis had clubs and guns, but there were far more of us than there were of them. If we turned on them all at once, we could overcome them. We were not animals to be led into slaughter. We were thinking, feeling human beings. One day, in the middle of the night, hauling rocks again, I vowed not to be killed without a fight. My father, Uncle Moshe, the Jewish elders, they were all wrong. We shouldn't be trying to survive. We should be trying to win. Instead of waiting for the British or the Americans or the Russians to save us, we should be saving ourselves. I'm not going to let them line me up on the edge of a pit and shoot me, I told myself. I will fight back. I will kick the Nazis in the shins. I will run. I won't go like a sheep to the slaughter. At roll call that night, someone else had the same thought. One of the Nazis struck him with a club. But instead of taking the beating meekly, the prisoner raised his arms and grabbed the stick and wrestled it from the shocked officer's hands and struck him in the head, knocking his Nazi hat into the muck, striking at his raised arms again and again. Yes, yes, I thought. It begins here. Together we can take them all. I looked around anxiously to see if anyone else felt as I did, if anyone else would take up the charge, but everyone else had their heads down. No! This was our chance. If we fought together. Crack. I jumped at the sound with the fiery spark of a pistol. It was all over. The prisoner who had fought back crumpled to the ground, dead from a bullet to the brain, and the assaulted officer was hurried away from the assembly grounds. The camp soldiers appeared in force around the edges of our lines, pointing rifles at us, and the camp commandant hurried out from his cozy office. When he heard the report from his officers, he turned on the prisoners. "You," he cried, pointing at a boy who had been standing right next to the man who fought back. "You were a part of this plot to escape." What? The boy stammered. He wasn't much older than me. No, I didn't even know him. The guards grabbed the boy and dragged him to the front of our lines, where the Nazis had built a gallows for hanging prisoners. "And this man," the commandant said, pointing into the crowd, "and this one, and him, and him, and him." He was picking people at random in his fury, punishing innocent people for the dead man's effrontery. I shrank back. I recognized the boy and two other men from the barrack. Like me, they couldn't even have known who the dead man was. "I'm innocent," the boy my age sobbed as they dragged him up onto the gallows and put the hangman's noose around his neck. "I never tried to escape. I promise. I've done everything you asked." I shook with helplessness and rage, but also with fear. This is what fighting back earned you. More abuse, more death. Half a dozen Jews were being murdered today because one man refused to die without a fight. To fight back was to die quickly and to take others with you. This was why prisoners went meekly to their deaths. I had been so resolved to fight back, but I knew then that I wouldn't. To suffer quietly hurt only you. To suffer loudly, violently, angrily, to fight back was to hurt and bring pain and death to others. "Please," the boy cried, "I never tried to escape. I'm innocent." He looked out on all of us, those of us with the courage to look up from the ground. "Remember," he begged us, "I did nothing." The hangman kicked the chair out from under him, and the boy's body jerked as his neck was broken. I kept my head held high and watched, vowing never to forget. If you want to hear Chapter 15 of Prisoner B-3087, look for my next video.